The NHL salary cap ceiling is officially set, and Boston is officially co-hosting the Four Nations Cup.
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoke to Beat. Today is Monday, June 10th, and I want to thank you so much for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine, free and available on your favorite podcast apps and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And before we get started, a quick reminder, you can find the podcast on social media at Locked NHL Bruins. You can find me, my hockey thoughts, dad jokes at Ian C. McLaren. I am a lifelong Bruins fan. I've been covering this team for various outlets for about 20 years now. We've been hosting this podcast for 5 years. Prior to that, I was a full-time news editor for thescore.com. And today on the podcast, we're going to break down a few newsy notes items to get you fully caught up on all things black and gold. And let's start with the announcement that the salary cap ceiling for 2024-25 is officially set at an even $88 million. That's a pretty significant bump from last year's $83.5 million ceiling, and it's significant for the Bruins in a few ways. First, if you look at last season, you'll remember that $4.5 million was set aside against the cap in bonuses for Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci. So they'll have even more money to work with than they did last offseason. There's a few things that you can already pencil in towards that extra cap space. The Bruins currently at $21.209166 million in projected cap space, which a big chunk will be devoted to Jeremy Swayman. He is a restricted free agent, and he will be due, and we've been talking about it for days here, maybe $6, $7, possibly $8 million against the cap. So that will be a good third of the available cap space going to Jeremy Swayman. The only other restricted free agents are Brandon Bussi, who may or may not be the backup goaltender, depending on whether they deal Linus Ullmark. If that's the case, they'll have over $26 million in available space. Jesper Boqvist, also a restricted free agent. I think he proved that he can hang with the Bruins and could be due, a modest contract extension. Then, of course, there's decisions to be made on Jake DeBrusk, who we hope is re-signed. Danton Heinen, same boat. Maybe Patrick Maroon, James Van Riemsdyk, and then we can all but say goodbye to Derek Forbort, Matt Grzelcyk, and Kevin Shattenkirk on the back end. So $88 million available to the Boston Bruins, who, are among teams currently kind of below or right on the salary cap floor at the moment. Quite a lot of cap space and a lot more than some of their division rivals. The Tampa Bay Lightning right now only have about 5.33 in available cap space, and that is with Steven Stamkos, Anthony Duclair as unrestricted free agents, as well as Calvin DeHaan, Matt Dumba, and Hayden Fleury on the back end. When it comes to the Florida Panthers, they have $20 million in available cap space, but that is with a bunch of free agents, including Sam Reinhart, Vladimir Tarasenko. Sam Bennett will be a unrestricted free agent after next season, as will Carter Verhaeghe, and they'll be able to sign extensions as early as July 1st. So those guys could be taking up a big chunk of that available cap space pretty soon. Oliver Ekman-Larsson, Dmitry Kulikov, Brandon Montour on the back end are also unrestricted free agents. Whereas Toronto in this, they have about 18 million in available cap space, but they have some holes to fill, of course, and decisions to be made on Mitch Marner. Now, I'm referring to these numbers with cap friendly, and that soon won't be the case because over the weekend, it was reported by Elliot Friedman of Sportsnet that the Washington Capitals will be purchasing cap friendly as kind of a proprietary tool that they will keep internally. Good on the developers, owners of Cap Friendly for getting that bag, but bad for us who rely on this valuable resource. And I guess Puckpedia is the next best site to look at. So bookmark that if you are into cap space and who is making what. The Ottawa Senators have about 12 million in available cap space. They have been rumored to be in on Jacob Markstrom from the Calgary Flames. That's something to keep an eye on. So at the moment, I should say the team with the most cap space is Utah, $43 million in available cap space at the moment. So they have a ton of spending to do. They have nobody signed on their blue line at the moment, if you can believe it. So they have to sign at least 6 defensemen. They have some RFAs, UFAs on the back end. So that's going to be an interesting team to keep an eye on here as free agency nears. They have a ton of draft picks as well. 6, 7 in the first 3 rounds, where the Bruins will be picking 0 in the first 3 rounds of the NHL entry draft coming up. A key date to keep in mind, and we'll discuss that later on today's show. So the Bruins, again, $21 million in available cap space. The ceiling is set at $88 million. They do have some dead cap on the books, though. $1.333334 million due in the Mike Riley buyout, which comes off the books at the end of next season. And the cap could be going up even more at that point. So they have $88 million minus that Mike Riley buyout to work with here as free agency approaches in just a few weeks. Now, over the weekend, another big announcement was made in terms of the Four Nations Cup, and we'll discuss Boston's involvement in that here coming up as the podcast continues. The NBA and NHL finals are in full swing, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel. FanDuel has all available bets for you to make. Just so many options. And right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's not just the NBA and NHL finals either. Summertime, of course, means baseball, and you can bet on it all on FanDuel. Again, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 that you can use towards finals MVPs, to who's going to hit a home run in tonight's MLB action. You can put $5 down on tonight's over-under in Game 2 of the Stanley Cup Finals, which is set at 5.5. Hit on that and get $200 in bonus bets. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you so much once again for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine, free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. While you're on YouTube, check out Locked On Sports Today. All the latest news, opinions, and analysis from across the Locked On Sports universe available free on YouTube and the Amazon Fire TV channels app. Now, prior to Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Final, the NHL and the NHLPA officially announced that the Bell Center in Montreal and TD Garden in Boston will serve as the host venues for the Four Nations Face-Off, which will take place in February 2025. The Four Nations will be Canada, Finland, Sweden, and the United States. This event will consist of 7 games played over a 9-day period from February 12th to 20th, along with a couple designated training practice days. All games will be played in accordance with NHL rules. So there will be 3 tournament games for each team in a traditional round-robin format. 3 points for a win, 2 points for a win in overtime or shootout, 1 point for a loss, 0 points for a regulation loss. The 2 teams with the best tournament record will then advance to a 1-game final. So each team will play the others once. Top 2 teams will go to the final. No semifinal in this one. Thursday, February 20th is when the final will be played. Now, a couple things to note about this. Yes, they wanted to keep it to a short event, but with Boston hosting and Montreal hosting, you had a perfect opportunity here to feature the 2 prominent players of note for these 2 franchises. You have Juraj Slafkovsky in Montreal, who is a Slovakian player. And you have, of course, David Pastrnak in Boston, who is Czech. And Czechs, of course, just won the World Championships just last month, showing that they belong among the top nations in international hockey. It would have made the tournament a bit longer, I guess, but you could have had 2 3-team pools. Each team plays each other once, and then you have a semifinal and a final, with the third team not advancing. Yes, Slovaks, Czechs, perhaps not as deep as the Finns and the Swedes. Certainly not as deep as US and Canada. But it would have been so great for those players to be featured on home ice. You have Slovaks in one group. They play their games in Montreal. You have the Czechs in the other group. They play their games in Boston. If they don't advance, at least they get a couple games featured on home ice. And I know David Pastrnak, for one, was disappointed not to be included. He had that caption after the Czechs won the World Championship. Maybe the NHL will take notice now and include them. That's not the case. They're limiting it to 4 countries. And Boston's best player will not be taking part in this best on best event with games being played on Boston, and that is on Boston ice, I should say, and that is a travesty. It's disappointing at the very least. There will be some Bruins, of course, in contention. Jeremy Swayman, Charlie McAvoy for the Americans, Brad Marchand for Team Canada, perhaps Linus Ullmark, if he's still a Bruin at that point, could represent Team Sweden. I'm sure Tuukka Rask will be around with the Finns playing some games just as a representative of the organization. But again, for the best player on the Bruins not to be involved when the games are being played in Boston does not make a lot of sense. Could there be some of the best Canadians involved? Cole Caulfield, Nick Suzuki, maybe an outside chance at playing for Team Canada. But again, super disappointing that David Pastrnak will not be able to participate in this event on home ice representing his native Czechia. I'm sure that would have been just such a thrill for him to wear the Czech uniform on home ice for him in the NHL. To wear that Czech uniform in Boston, his home away from home, I'm sure would have been incredibly meaningful for him. But the NHL deciding to limit it to 4 countries. Now, the first 6 players from each nation will be announced Friday, June 28th. Tickets will be on sale at some point. They'll be announced when available. You can get sign up information, updates on the NHL website on the 2025 NHL 4 Nations Face-Off website. I'll include that in the show notes today for anybody who is interested. Now, June 28th is also a key date in the NHL for another reason, and we'll discuss that here as the podcast continues. Stanley Cup Final underway. Florida taking Game 1. It continues tonight with Game 2. And there's some key dates to keep an eye on here as we near the end of the season, the end of 2023-24, and turn our eyes to 2024-25. Now, we already had the scouting combine last week in Buffalo, and there were representatives from the Boston Bruins, despite the fact that they don't have a pick in rounds 1, 2, or 3 of the draft yet. The NHL entry draft will take place on June 28th and 29th at the Sphere in Las Vegas. Barring a trade, the Bruins will not make a selection until the 4th round, but there is an opportunity to get into the first round, if not the second or third, with a trade prior to that point. Perhaps they trade the rights to Jake DeBrusk if they don't believe that they're going to come to a contract agreement. They could trade the rights to any of their unrestricted free agents and give the acquiring team a exclusive window of negotiation prior to July 1st. So that could be true of DeBrusk, Heinen, Maroon, Magna, Van Riemsdyk, Forbort, Grzelcyk, and Shattenkirk. Will they get a first, second, or third for those rights? Probably not. But picking up an additional late round pick is also an option. Where they can get a first, second, or third is perhaps in a Linus Ullmark trade. And we've already heard that the New Jersey Devils, Buffalo Sabres, have put the 10th and 11th overall picks on the table in a trade, and both could be in the market for goaltenders, especially in the New Jersey Devils. Following that, free agency will open on July 1st. Again, the Bruins have a ton of cap space to use, pending the Jeremy Swayman extension, and unless they re-sign some of their pending unrestricted free agents before that time. The Bruins on July 1st will also open their 2024 development camp at Warrior Ice Arena. Of course, last year, Mason Lohrei, Matt Poitras were development camp participants. They became NHL regulars this past season. There'll be a handful of prospects with the opportunity to make the same leap, including Fabian Lysell, Georgi Merkulov, and some younger guys as well. Who knows if they'll be at development camp? It's usually, 4 guys who are perhaps on their entry-level deals looking to make the next step. The Bruins won't have anything on their schedule between July 4th and September 11th when rookie camp will begin, and then training camp is set to begin on September 18th. So, what does that mean for us here at Locked On Boston Bruins? Well, we will be daily through the Stanley Cup Final, through the NHL entry draft, the beginning of free agency, breaking down any moves that the Bruins make, previewing free agency, throwing out some mock trades perhaps, breaking down anything the Bruins actually do between that point, and just discussing this team on a daily basis, because that is what we do here on Locked On Boston Bruins. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Tomorrow on the pod, we're going to do Fake Trade Tuesday, where we'll pitch a theoretical trade. Like to see the team pursue this summer, and just continue to bring you all the latest here on the Boston Bruins on the Locked On Podcast Network, your favorite team every single day. I hope you all had a great weekend. I had a softball tournament. We went all the way to the finals, but lost in the championship game. I am still incredibly sore. Also went to the dentist this morning, so my mouth is a bit sore. Perhaps why I am stumbling over my words a little as well. Anyways, thank you so much for taking time to chat. Bringing you up to date on the cap ceiling, the Four Nations Cup, Suns, David Pastrnak, other key dates to keep an eye on. And we'll be back here tomorrow to bring you all the latest here on Locked On Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your favorite team every single day. Take care, friends.